All right, let's call this Richfield Planning Commission meeting to order for August 27th, 2018. Our first item is approval of minutes of the regular Planning Commission meeting from July 23rd, 2018. Would anybody like to make a motion on that?
So moved.
Is there a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Our next item is an opportunity for citizens to address the commission on items not on the agenda. So there was at least one gentleman who asked about this opportunity. So if there's something, a general concern you have that isn't about the specific projects that we're going to talk about later, or the specific project on Cedar, this would be your opportunity to do so. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and state your name and address, and do we have a sign-in? Yep. So sign in when you, yeah. And be sure to speak into the mic so they can record it.
Well, I'm Craig Olson, and I live on Bloomington Avenue, and I've watched all the development that's happened in the last, 5 to 10 years over there. And, there's good and bad in all development, and I really appreciate that what you guys do, because it's not easy to do. I know to sit back and listen to complaints and have all these different things coming at you, different directions. But I do remember the last time that it was approved to go forward over there, it was single-family housing. It wasn't multi apartment buildings 4 stories high right up to the parkway, which is what the new proposal looks like. That's pretty ugly in my opinion. They're taking out some beautiful trees. The name of the road is a parkway, not a building way. I just don't care for it. And I've talked to all my neighbors. They don't want to look and see to the east in the morning and see somebody else's apartment building. And that's how we feel about that, or I feel about that. And I know that there's another 300 unit that's going in right over by Jim's house, the way it looks over there. And, that's 500 units in just apartments. And isn't that 1,000 cars if they're market rate apartments? Isn't that 2 people in each apartment? Can that be handled in them roundabouts? What about all the water runoff that's going to happen from these buildings? Those are all parking lots. They're not grass. There's no place, beautiful park here. It's all going to flood down in my pond. And I call it my pond because I walk there 7 days a week. And I've watched that thing rise and fall. And there's actually was an improvement done, improved by city engineers, improved by engineers that developed the property, that the parkway that took the place of 63rd, which is right where I live. There's no drain in that pond right there. So after all that planning, the city pumps that pond whenever it floods. So, my point is you got all these great ideas. You got a company that really wants to do it. Being an accountant, I know a little about the 2 or 3 owners down the line. Someone might profit from this, but it's the developers who make money, and the city wants a nice plan. But it really isn't, it's tough to even get financing. I've heard that they can only get half the financing. Always remember, the person should come to the table with a fair deal, not necessarily a promise for the future. And I really am adamant that I do not want an apartment building. I don't care if it's market rate or not. A market rate apartment would definitely be 2 cars per person per apartment. That's a lot of impact in that neighborhood. With the 300, 200 more, that's over 500 cars plus 68 or 88 townhomes. You're talking that's 700 more cars or 600 more cars just in that area alone, if not 1,000 cars, let alone the runoff. And 4 stories towering over Target, and I just don't like it. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm not alone in this. What's happened is the people are completely defeated in that neighborhood. Matter of fact, they sat there in limbo for a considerable length of time waiting to close on their home, and it never happened. So they never did improvements to their home. I know people personally that planned on retiring that put it off. They had a more remarkable opportunity to buy some homes at a bargain value a couple years ago. Good luck with that today. So things just, now that it's taken this time and deals that fell through, let's take our time on this one. Maybe it could be a little more parky looking and single family homes, which is what this community was built on, not multi-family homes. And if we're trying to replace other people that live there, you know, it was only what? That whole area was 122 homes. I just read it. Between the 122 dwellings, including the apartments. The townhomes alone almost cover that, let alone that 300-person tower by Jim's house. I mean, I just really want you to take back and say, hey, you know, if someone can't come to the table and say, I can finance this whole deal, there's no way. And then I also heard that they don't have to pay the full property taxes on their own little townhouse unit. Everybody else in this town pays taxes on their unit. I don't know why anybody would get a special deal on it. So there's my opinions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else who just has a general comment for the commission? Okay. We'll move on to approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda or any changes?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right, our first item is a public hearing and consideration of a variety of land use approvals related to a proposal to construct 218 apartments and 72 townhomes along 16th Avenue and Richfield Parkway between Taft Park and 65th Street. And this is a public hearing that was continued from last month. Staff?
Thank you. NHH Properties, the developer, has assembled a team that is proposing to redevelop the area south of Taft Park and immediately adjacent to Cedar Point Commons as multifamily housing. This area has been a redevelopment priority for Richfield for many years as a result of airport expansion in the early 2000s. The proposed development includes 2 4-story apartment buildings along Richfield Parkway and 18 4-unit buildings of for-sale townhomes along 16th Avenue. The development has been designed to provide an enhanced buffer from the airport for the older single-family homes to the west, and also to create a cohesive neighborhood feel and transition between the existing homes and the new development. A new sidewalk and boulevard trees along 16th Avenue will create a walkable and friendly environment, and where possible, end townhome units have entrances facing 16th Avenue, as well as sidewalk connections. While the orientation of townhome driveways onto 16th Avenue will significantly increase the traffic on that street, the traffic levels will remain below City of Richfield engineering thresholds for road design or operations modifications. Staff supports this orientation of the townhomes because it serves as a way to integrate the new development into the existing neighborhood rather than to create a development that is isolated from the existing homes across the street. The larger apartment buildings are oriented toward the commercial development to the east, allowing surface parking to be hidden between the 2 halves of the development and keeping that traffic primarily on Richfield Parkway. Additional parking is provided beneath the 2 apartment buildings, and parking overall is provided at ratios that meet city code requirements. The development provides a number of amenities to its residents, including a pool, fitness center, club rooms, and green space, and also provides attractive connections between the single-family homes to the west and the commercial district through a central plaza along approximately where 64th Street is today. The proposal includes attractive streetscapes, the central plaza I just mentioned, public art at key intersections, and a pocket park that will provide a convenient rest area at the northeast corner of the site for users of the 3 Rivers Trail. The city has been working to redevelop the Cedar Corridor area since the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport expanded in the early 2000s. A number of homes were purchased with state and federal airport noise mitigation dollars, but both money and the market dried up shortly after the new runway opened, and that work came to a halt. Additional homes were purchased more recently when this section of Richfield Parkway was constructed, and many remaining homeowners in the area on 16th Avenue have been waiting for years for their homes to be purchased. The developer has purchase agreements for all but 4 of the remaining privately owned homes, all on the southern half of the development area. If the developer is unable to purchase these remaining 4 homes, townhome units could be built around those individual homes, There is a narrative attached to this report that details the contingency plan for those purchases. In conjunction with the proposed new construction, the developer is proposing changes to 65th Street, to the 65th Street intersections at both Richfield Parkway and 16th Avenue. The proposed changes are intended to allow townhome residents to access the development via 16th rather than solely via Richfield Parkway. And the proposal will allow traffic to turn west from Richfield Parkway onto 65th Street. That roadway will be modified to slow traffic by narrowing the right-of-way and providing on-street parking bays, and by installing a four-way stop at 65th Street and 16th Avenue. Cut through commercial traffic led to the current roadway modification when Target and Home Depot initially opened. Since that time, Richfield Parkway has been constructed and now provides a much more attractive route in and out of that commercial area. A study of how traffic in the area is expected to flow is forthcoming, and based on the information in that study, engineering staff will work with the developer on the specific design of 65th Street and those intersections. I do want to cover just a couple of the conditions that are in the resolution that we're looking at as part of this, just because I'm anticipating questions sort of related to a few of these items. So maybe it'd be helpful just to read through those conditions. The first bullet point in the resolution is the applicant must acquire all properties in the development area, or they must return to the city council for approval of an amended development to remove those properties that are not acquired. The approved buildings must comply with noise attenuation construction requirements of the airport runway overlay district. And then finally, staff finds that the proposed project meets the intent of the Cedar Corridor Master Plan and city code and zoning code requirements, and staff is recommending approval of the proposed project. Staff can stand for any questions on the land use side of things. And then Julie Urban, the city's housing manager, is here to answer any questions there may be for some of the non-land use items. I do want to remind planning commissioners that the planning commission is charged with interpreting and carrying out the city's comprehensive plan and zoning ordinance. While there may be questions about affordability and TIF districts and things like that, you are certainly welcome to answer those questions, but they are not a factor in the powers and duties of the planning commission. Also, the development team is here to answer any questions you have, and city engineer Jeff Pearson is here to answer any specific questions about traffic. Thank you.
Any questions for staff before we ask the developer to speak?
Could I ask a quick clarifying question? So with regards to the Planning Commission's role in interpreting the comp plan, I know that a part of the comp plan is talking about maintaining an appropriate mix of housing types in each zone or in each area of the city. So does that fall under our purview?
In terms of the mix of housing types, I would say that does.
So that would include like affordability, mix rate, things like that.
You know, I can't speak to whether I don't know to what extent the comprehensive plan talks about affordability in terms of housing types, in terms of multi-unit buildings versus attached townhomes, row homes, single-family homes. That the physical composition, I think, of the city's housing stock is certainly within the purview of the Planning Commission.
Okay, because on here, the 2008 comp plan, it does talk a little bit about maintaining an appropriate mix of housing types and promote housing diversity to serve families at all stages of their life cycle. So just throwing that out, that could include affordability.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Mr. Brilhart, could you repeat what you said after it's our role to interpret the comp plan, the end of that sentence?
Sure. So I can actually read from the city code city code section that outlines planning commission powers and duties. So planning commissions are authorized by Minnesota state statutes, section 462, that basically give cities the authority to create and have planning commissions. And then that state statute basically recommends that each city outline the powers and duties of their planning commission as they see fit. And Richfield's ordinance says that the planning commission shall deliberate and make recommendations or final decisions as applicable on proposed amendments to the zoning code or map, land development applications requiring site plan approval, interim use permits, conditional use permits, or variances from the land development regulations of the city, and such other matters relating to planning and development with the city as may be referred to it by the city council.
Commissioner Rudolph, did you?
Yeah, I've got a question. You mentioned that there were some properties that hadn't come to an agreement yet, and that if they couldn't come to an agreement on those, other properties would be given back to the city. Or you're talking about the properties that they're purchasing from the HRA, or can you clarify that?
No, those are, Chair, members of the commission, those are properties that are privately owned they are in negotiations with 3 and haven't heard from the 4th. So it's always been an issue with this project, how to get started and move it forward without purchasing all the properties, or, at what point could they move forward? And they are moving forward at this point, believing they will come to an agreement with all of the property owners and wanted to move forward. Staff felt, though, that they needed to have a contingency plan in place and to understand that if for some reason they aren't able to come to an agreement with those owners, they'll need to come back through the process and amend the PUD.
Any other questions? Okay, would the developer like to speak? And then, as we do with any other member of the public, please state your name and your address.
Good evening. My name is Petro Megitz, Cost Wilson Architects, basically 1301 Bloomington.
And I'm Tony Simmons with the Simmons Group. We're one of the developers on the project. My address is also 1301.
So thank you for giving us an opportunity here tonight. As, again, staff have done an amazing job presenting, and they've also have a very, very diligent report. There's really, to the point of what we're proposing, it meets all the criteria of land use. We've met all the, the designations. Really, we're just looking for your guidance, and we stand for any questions that you might have.
Any questions for the developers at this time?
What is the status of the last 4 properties? And
So the last 4 properties are currently under negotiation. If they were not to purchase because there is no eminent domain that is applicable, we would be building townhomes next to their properties and leaving them in place.
so would you be building them to the north and then the south, so there could conceivably be a house fit in, kind of like, you see the worst case scenario, a big skyrise on each side of a small little house?
The 4 properties that are remaining are all on the south side of the property.
Mm-hmm.
So they would be, basically, there would be 1 townhome, 2 houses, 1 townhome, 2 houses, and then the rest of the development.
Okay.
Any other questions for the developer before we open the public hearing? Thank you. Oh.
Hi, Lori Boyclair Corporation. I'm one of the developers, 610 Ottawa, Golden Valley, Minnesota. Just want to make a comment. In one of the remarks that were made earlier was about this townhome unit does not have to pay taxes, real estate taxes, and that's incorrect. There is TIF involved, but the homeowner will be responsible for real estate taxes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So this is a public hearing. If any members of the public would like to come forward and speak, go ahead, sir. And likewise, please state your name again.
Frank Olson, Bloomington Avenue. Again, I really appreciate the commission because I know that this is a lot to weigh, seeing how, the boss of the city, none of those people work here, live here, we live here.
Could you speak into the mic, please?
Because remember, those people's jobs rely on development. You guys are in charge of the planning. So you don't have to have it slammed down your throat, I guess is part of what I'm saying. And what I've heard about the real estate taxes, the taxes were going to be divided by 4 in each unit. And I don't think anybody else in this town would find out that if I could combine my taxes together to get a cheaper bill would be nice, but that's the rumor that I've heard. But I do like to always say that, regardless of what these people, I know it's their job, it's their people like you and me that go to work every day, but they don't live here. We live here. And I don't want a 4-story building next to my house. And the water runoff.
Thank you. Anybody else who would like to speak about this development? Okay, do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Do we have a second? To close the public hearing?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of closing the public hearing? All in favor of closing?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the public hearing is now closed. Thank you. Any general discussion among ourselves or questions of staff at this time?
I've got a few questions.
Okay, go ahead,
Things that we
Commissioner.
didn't address, give me a little latitude here, things I've written down. Do we know what, it looks like the parking ratios are about 1 to 4. And, as I noticed that, there's 218 units in the apartments, but only 188 underground. Is there a reason why there wasn't a full 1-to-1 for apartments?
There is additional, in addition to the underground parking for each development, there's a significant amount of surface parking behind the development,
Yep.
or in
Yeah.
between the townhomes and the apartment buildings.
The other question, so Richfield Parkway was actually built at the same time that Cedar Point development was built. And I heard your argument for opening that up to two-way traffic, having lived in the neighborhood for nearly 20 some years. I remember that was closed after the build of Richfield Parkway, after Target was built. I'm just trying to understand the reasoning for opening that up to city traffic other than the one-way than it is right now.
Chair, members of the commission, I'm Jeff Pearson, city engineer. Are you talking about 65th?
65th.
Yeah. So you're correct in that kind of up to 65th was constructed with the Target development, Cedar Point development. At that time, the portion of 17th, which is now Richfield Parkway north of that, was not reconstructed. And then part of that included the connection of 65th and 64th, those blocks into 17th. And then if you remember, it kind of looped around the Taft Lake the connection there. So a few years back, the city connected Richfield Parkway on the south end of Taft into Bloomington Avenue, and also reconstructed the 2-block section of 17th into Richfield Parkway. And that's the time frame where those houses, through a reverse petition, elected to assess themselves out, basically. As part of that project, we disconnected 64th, I'm sorry. And then with the connection on the north end, the majority, the concern of the cut-through traffic, both what we observed at 64th, and if you remember, there was barricades put out on 64th to block the traffic. Majority of the concern there was from South Minneapolis traffic, coming down Bloomington, wanting to get to the development, cutting through the neighborhood to get to that development. Now that traffic pattern has been eliminated basically with the connection of Richfield Parkway. So, and 64th was not reconnected as part of that project. So the only people really using 65th would be the neighborhood, because the exiting south would use the roundabout on Richfield Parkway, going to the north would use Richfield Parkway to go to Bloomington. That neighborhood directly to the west would be the ones we would look to allow to use 65th.
Are we going to be using any street parking for these calculations? I think I saw some parallel parking lines being added on 65th.
Those are not included in they are providing all of the required parking on site.
Okay.
Part of the reason to propose those is for traffic calming, to make that not an attractive cut through.
You know, trust me, I'm not trying to stir an old pot here. I really like that you are doing what I consider the right thing and doing a step-down buffer between high-density and single-family homes. It kind of stirs a old pot where I feel some of it was kind of like a slap in the face to the residents of very close, the Chamberlain, that when they pointed out, and we pointed out at that point, the need for step-down between high-density and residential, by city staff. It was really, and being part of the comprehensive plan, it was more so, seemed like it was shrugged off at the time. I'm really happy, trust me, I'm really happy that this is part of the consideration. It's just something that has been weighing on me, seeing that being now used in this plan with reference to the 2004 comp plan. I'm glad it's being used, trust me, but I think it needed to be said. Can you speak to why you use it here and maybe not in previous developments for the requirement for the step down of the townhomes between high density and residential, single family?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I guess I'd answer that a few different ways. One is you have to think about what the boundaries of the TIF district and redevelopment area are. 16th, north of 66th Street, 16th Avenue is the boundary. So there will be no more development expansion to the west. It just won't occur. Whereas south of 66th Street, the redevelopment area and the TIF district extend out 1/2 block additionally from the Chamberlain. And so there still are opportunities for that, for more of a transition to occur in that area. So it's not, the door is not closed on that. Secondly, every one of these projects, and again, here we're probably getting into more financial stuff, but every one of these projects, is proposed independently, evaluated independently, and the finances, for example, of the Chamberlain would not allow for a lesser density. So the only way for the Chamberlain to provide a step down would have been to increase the density more on the as you went further east, so perhaps 5-story buildings further to the east to allow step down to the west. And that's something that was explored in early iterations, but was ultimately not pursued. And I can't remember if it was at policymakers' direction or at the developers' architectural level, or some of both. I just can't recall.
Is there anything else, Commissioner Rudolph?
Do you know if I'm having a hard time, I guess, supporting, doing this in phases if they can't purchase the other 4 homes? I know we have a lot of impact in the neighborhood. I don't want to build around somebody. Do you know how close we are, into, I really would like to see this, I guess, done as a one-time thing and not, have somebody kind of forced out. You know what I mean?
Good evening, Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Adam Serafine with NHH Properties in Edina. To specifically address Commissioner Rudolph's question about how are we purchasing the remaining 4 houses and what happens to the specific homes and then, of course, the new townhomes that go in. Everything that Mr. Simmons said is correct. However, over the last 24 hours, we've had a couple updates and a little bit of progress. So of the 4 homes that are currently not under contract with my company, we are now talking to 2 more of the homeowners. So right now there's 1 homeowner that we have not talked to and 1 that we're not currently in active conversations with. All 4 of those homes, as outlined in the narrative that should be in your package, are on the southern end of the site, and those would be the 6,400 addresses. And simply put, if we don't acquire those houses because they are on the southern end of the site, what we would do is just stop building the townhomes. So the southern end of the site would consist of some raw land and then between 2 and 4 homes. Just like we don't want to come in and bully a resident around, we also have to sell these townhomes to new residents in the community, and we can't stack them on top of each other. It just wouldn't work from basic land use parameters as well as our general sales and marketing strategy.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yep. Mr. Kwan.
I thought that I heard one of you say you would do, I know that we have to come back if those 4 houses aren't purchased, but I thought it was going to be townhome, house, townhome, house for those southern, but now you're saying you just wouldn't do those townhomes.
Technically, that could happen. We will not do that from a business standpoint. It does not make sense. I do not want to, number one, disrupt the homeowner that is living in the house and put 2 townhomes on either side of them. And then I also do not want to be challenged with attempting to sell those townhomes when there isn't like-kind housing next to it. It would, simply put, it'd be awkward.
But if this was approved, you would have the option to do that, right?
And I would be okay with the restriction that required a setback off of the new townhome or green space or some sort of mitigating factor that would prevent that from happening.
And then lastly, do you know the size difference between those townhomes and the houses? If even you say you're not going to do it, if they were interspersed, what's the height difference between the average of those 4 homes and the townhomes, or the size difference?
I do not know off the top of my head, but I know the architect can answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, Commissioners, if I could just clarify, they will have to request an amended PUD if they do not find an agreement with all 4 of those owners. So this is what they're proposing to do, but they will have to come back and have it blessed by you. So just to clarify that.
I would further add, first of all, just for the record, I didn't identify myself earlier. I'm John Stark, the Community Development Director. I don't know that the 4 remaining houses are a package. It's possible they could reach agreement with 3 or 2 or 1. And I think they would probably go back and evaluate their plans based on how many of those they did buy. What I'm hearing is that they couldn't buy any of the 4. They would probably stop at that point. If they could buy a portion thereof, again, they may reconsider that.
Did you have something else to add?
Just in regards to the height. So as was in your packet, we're looking at about 37 feet 6 inches to the top of the parapet on the townhomes, and then your average home in that area is probably about 30 feet to the top of the roof. Somewhere.
What was the first measurement, sorry, of the townhome?
37 feet 6 inches.
Thank you.
And staff, what's the maximum height that would be allowed for a single-family home?
The maximum height on a single-family home would be 25 feet, which is measured to the midpoint of the peak of the roof and the eaves. We found that with a lot of the newer homes that are being built in Richfield, they are built pretty close to that maximum 25 feet, and the peak height winds up being somewhere between 28 and 29 feet tall.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for staff? Or Commissioner Rudolph, are you finished?
I am finished.
Okay.
So do we need to add a condition on that, or they need to come back with us if they don't?
Chair Hayford O'Leary, Commissioners, that stipulation is actually in, that is in the resolution. That was the one I read to you as part of my staff report. I apologize if that didn't stand out a little more, but so the very first condition on the resolution is the applicant must acquire all properties in the development area or must return to the city council, which would include coming back to the planning commission as well, because the planning to amend the PUD, that would include another public hearing coming before the planning commission and then the city council to amend that PUD. So they must return to the commission and council for approval of an amended resolution to remove the properties not acquired.
Commissioner Hoberg?
Yeah, I have a question. So if TIF funding is being used on this project, is there an affordability component that would be required, or is that being waived? I was looking at the HRA notes and it just was like in the consent agenda piece of it, it didn't specify.
Chair, Commissioners, the affordability piece in this project is with the townhomes. So they will be a housing district that requires 95% of them to be affordable at 100% of the area median income if you're a 1 or 2 person household, and 115% if you're a 3 or more person household. We are hoping to increase the affordability for some of those units by applying for funds to provide soft second mortgages, but the timing didn't work to do that this year, so we will be applying next year for that. And so that's our hope. It's dependent somewhat on Minnesota Housing agreeing. We're already laying the groundwork to show them and tell them what a great opportunity this would be for them to partner with us. And so our hope is to have, I believe it's 14 or is it 16, we'll apply for funds for that. So that would increase affordability to 80% for a number of them.
And then to follow up on that, how long will those townhomes have to remain affordable? Is it just the first purchase, or is it?
Well, they're income restricted at the first purchase. So.
And then after that, they would become market rate?
After that, well, the affordability is what the market prices them at. They hope to, or they're planning to price them in the low 300s. And so in theory, that's what they would continue to be, dependent upon market forces, just like the homes across the street will raise in price or lower in price. These would as well.
So there wouldn't be an income restriction after the second sale?
But you wouldn't have to qualify by income, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I would just add that affordability control is part of the state TIF statutes. It's not something we have control over.
Any other questions or general comments?
One more question.
Commissioner Rudolph?
Can you tell me about the traffic study? When was that done? And what were the results? Were we close in percentage or?
Yeah, absolutely. Chair and Commissioners. There was a traffic study done in 2016 when there was a first proposal on the site. We had them update that traffic study because their site plan changed, and so where the vehicles were leaving changed somewhat. The new updated traffic study adds about 400 vehicles per day onto 16th, for a total on 16th, if you add the existing houses on the west side, of around 550 to 600 vehicles a day. That's under full build out of all the townhomes. That's pretty much exactly in line with a lot of our residential streets, especially as you get closer to 66th Street. Many of them are in that 600 to 700 vehicle range. So at least from our staff perspective, we're not too concerned about 16th. On the Richfield Parkway side, the additional traffic, the site plan shows kind of a main intersection lining up with the entrance to the target parcel across the street, and then additional right in, right out on the north side. We expect most of the traffic will probably use that main intersection, and so we've asked the traffic engineer for the developer to review the numbers. They've put out traffic cameras and done some vehicle counts on existing in that area. So we're waiting for some of that data to look at what is that intersection? Does it become a four-way stop? Currently, it works just fine without stopping Richfield Parkway, but we understand that number of vehicles will increase there. On the south end, the roundabout was designed for full redevelopment in this area and full redevelopment to the south, so there's really no capacity issues with that.
Thank you.
Mr. Pearson, if I could ask you just a quick question about, since there are planned to be changes to 65th Street with the curb line and that, there's a very short sidewalk gap just south of this project, which would mean that this 2 blocks of sidewalk going up to Richfield Parkway and the sidewalk on 65th would have like 40 feet of lawn just to the south of that. Is that something the city is open to correcting? Particularly with the other changes that you're planning to make at that intersection?
I'm gonna have to ask for a little clarification on what
So
you're talking about.
Along 16th Avenue, just south of the intersection at 65th Street, there's half of one single-family parcel of missing sidewalk.
So basically from the church or school north to 65th.
Yep.
Well, we don't have plans. We are in the middle of, or we're not in the middle, we're nearing completion of a pedestrian plan as part of the comp plan process. And part of that will be future funding allocations in our CIP for pedestrian improvements. So it may be something that we can look at as part of that.
I would say it'd be unfortunate to see city resources and developer resources going into making other changes to the public street and to not correct that error. I appreciate that we can do things in 20 years, as part of our CIP, but this is kind of an immediate issue that becomes an issue because of the sidewalk that this development is adding. So I hope that there's a way to at least be looking at that as part of this project. I know it's beyond the property lines of what we're considering, but it becomes an issue only because of the sidewalks that are added here. That's all. Good, you guys found it. Is half of one parcel. I wasn't exaggerating.
Yeah, there's a little more clarification there. I didn't realize it was literally just one little parcel.
Yeah.
So it's something we could look at.
Okay, thank you. And then one other thing, it's not something the commission needs to act on, but just a feedback to the developer. The private sidewalk routing within the parcel is a little bit frenetic, and I hope that can be cleaned up. You've got a lot of situations where if I were a resident there, I'd be walking across your grass and creating a dead path of grass. So I hope those can be sort of made into slightly more intuitive routes, but I'm sure that's something that can be worked out with staff later. And then I guess just, in general, I think this is a good project. We don't have visual standards exactly, but I think it is nice that this is, I think, much more attractive than the Chamberlain. It has a really nice presence. It has the townhomes on 16th, which I think are a good thing. So I'm pretty supportive of it. I think my biggest complaint about the project really, and I will be voting to support it, but I wish in a theoretical world it weren't that way. I don't love the driveways onto 16th. Although it does provide some connectivity to the west, it also provides a disconnect to the east, and it's unfortunate that there's that lack of cohesiveness within the development. And I think other developments like Kensington Park, where they've integrated that traffic flow, have been really better for everybody. I've raised this concern before, and I've gotten some good explanations about the grade and some other issues, so I can live with it, but I think in a perfect world, I would have rather seen more front stoops on 16th and fewer driveways. Any other general sort of comments or feedback about the project?
I live on the east side, and I would just want to say that, you live in a neighborhood where you hear a lot from a lot of different people. And the communication that I've heard from between the developer and residents, not only the residents that are getting bought out, but the residents that live in the neighborhood, I want to say has been rated A+. Thank you. It's kind of, I think, the model that I would hope other developers take as far as at least the communication, whether the project's good or not, communication that they've done with the residents that I've heard about.
Mr. Chair, yeah. This could be for staff or the developers. I understand, I think I mostly like it. And I know that area's been designated for redevelopment and part of the Cedar Corridor Master Plan to be high-density residential, right, MR3, But I wonder why, either of you can answer, but why, like with the 40-foot setback, it's not there, it's less, and I understand the caveat about the parking being between buildings, but still the setback is reduced. The height is not meeting the 50 feet, it's 55 to 60. I understand why it's 60 in some places. And then it's covering 40% of the area rather than 30. So in all areas, it's kind of pushing beyond. Is it, I know there's a profit involved, and I don't understand all the formula for that, but does it need to be extending beyond the designations in each direction? Just, you can still be a buffer and not be that big, quite that big, for them to be pushing all those boundaries beyond what would fit normally in that high density designation.
There's a couple different factors, and one of them you did touch on is overall financial feasibility. And you do need a certain amount of units with the large amount of land that we have. The second factor, myself and the development team has been working on this project since 2015, and one of the original, I don't want to say fights or battles that we had, but one of the original pieces that we kept going back and forth over were density. We wanted something smaller, and we were told to go bigger and bigger and bigger. So I feel like we've now come to a compromise where the project meets all of the standards and touch points that we're all looking for.
You were told to go bigger, bigger, bigger by who?
By the previous mayor and some of the other staff.
Thanks.
Chair Hayford, earlier, commissioners, I did want to address the setback question. So the Commissioner Quam, you were primarily asking about the setback to Richfield Parkway. Is that correct? Yeah. So in the staff report, I'm sitting here. Number one, pulling the apartment buildings closer to Richfield Parkway allowed for that width to fit not only the apartment buildings but that surface parking between the two halves of the development. And also, I guess the buildings were, I think, intentionally pulled up to Richfield Parkway to engage to engage more directly with the commercial building and with and to, I guess, engage those future residents with Richfield Parkway. The MR3 district, the high density zoning district, it has larger setbacks than many of our, I guess, more modern, what we call more modern zoning districts, such as the mixed use zoning districts that all allow for significantly reduced setbacks. Generally for commercial development, but those other zoning districts do allow for reduced setbacks for residential development as well. That 40-foot setback is quite large, and I don't think that's really not in line with, I guess, current development standards and trends.
Any other questions or feedback at this point? I was just one question for staff about that engaging with Richfield Parkway. The renderings show a pretty significant long blank wall with no windows along Richfield Parkway. Is that the final appearance, or is there anything being done to improve that engagement with the street or the trail?
Chair Hayford, earlier, members of the commission, we do have there has been ongoing dialogue about that. Some of that, I think, couldn't be helped because of the pretty drastic grade change from north to south along each of these buildings. I think it's probably most pronounced, that kind of exposed subgrade parking level is most exposed on kind of the north end of the south building. There is one condition in the resolution that additional landscaping or varied building treatments are required in areas where a significant amount of underground parking structure is visible. I understand that the development team is working on that, so I guess we'll throw it to them for any additional commentary on at this time. But they have been instructed to come up with some solutions in that regard.
That is correct. So we're all looking at providing some more dense vegetation in specific areas. So again, to kind of break up that wall, and then also we're doing some fenestration studies to see if we add an additional window or opening, or maybe a change in material, something of that nature to kind of break that.
Okay, and just to be clear, the image on page 39 shows a perspective looking northwest that shows quite a number of actually windows in what other elevations and renderings show a blank wall. Is that not accurate on page 39 of our packet? And I wish I could give you a reference that you could match, but I'm hoping maybe staff can bring it up.
The page that's being referenced, I think we could probably pull it up on the screen here.
Is it A001 on the bottom?
It does not say so.
On the bottom.
One that I was looking at
Oh.
was the same thing. It is
So
not.
That's the rendering. Were you looking at, is that correct? On page 39, you were looking at a
Page 30.
rendering?
Page 39 is what I was looking at. So it's above, it's one of the smaller sheets in the packet. Specific, but.
So I think what the chair is referring to is on the, from this vista provided in the rendering, it doesn't appear to show as much subgrade parking exposed at the north end of that building, whereas some of the other renderings, specifically the view, the renderings that provide the view from across, like at that one at the 64th Street.
Yep.
Vantage, that one kind of more clearly shows that exposed.
Okay, so that is a more
subgrade.
accurate representation in terms of what will be built at this point. Okay. I will say, just in my opinion, a cinder block wall with a bunch of bushes in front of it is still a cinder block wall, so I hope you can come up with something better than that.
You got it.
Is there any ideas of maybe doing false windows on the center block wall?
Well, I don't know if they would be false. We would actually probably provide actual windows
Okay.
to be able to see.
Yeah, I have seen a number of parking structures or residential parking with windows opening, so I would hope that would be an option, but. Anyway, sorry, that was kind of a tangent, everyone, but so again, we don't have any motion on the table. Any other general comments, or would somebody like to make a motion? And I would like to take these separately if we can.
Yeah, how do we do these separately?
So just, there are two items listed in the it's actually listed 1 and 3, but I think there are just 2 approvals that you need. Staff, is that right?
That's correct. It is a typo. There are only 2
Okay.
motions. It's the zoning change from the MR3 to PMR, and then the planned unit development.
And that includes the additional language that you wanted added for it to coming back to us.
That's correct.
Okay.
That stipulation is in the resolution that's in front of you.
So would anybody like to make a motion on the first item of the zoning designations?
I'll do that.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of an ordinance amending Appendix 1 of the Richfield City Code to change the zoning designation of Blocks 1 and 2, Iverson, Second Edition, from MR3, High Density Residential, to PMR, Planned Multifamily Residential.
Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Okay, any discussion of the motion to rezone? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. Would anybody like to make a motion on the second item for the PUD?
Do that as well.
Good.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of a resolution approving a planned unit development, conditional use permit, and final development plan for a multifamily apartment and townhome development to be built on property legally described as Blocks 1 and 2, Iverson, Second Edition.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion of the PUD? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you. So our next item is cancellation of the public hearing regarding a request for a variance at 6601 Nicollet Avenue South.
Thank you. The owners of 6601 Nicollet Avenue South, that's the Richfield Shops South property, which currently includes the Lakes Buffet, Army Recruiting Office, and Hot Comics, formerly Best Buy Mobile. The owners of that property submitted an application proposing to replace and relocate the existing trash enclosure on the property to better meet the needs of their tenants. When staff reviewed their initial proposal, it was determined that a variance from setback requirements was needed. However, with staff guidance, the applicant resubmitted plans, and staff found that no variance was needed. Because notice of the public hearing was published in the Sun Current, the Planning Commission must cancel the public hearing.
Do we have a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Public hearing is canceled. So our next item is a finding of consistency that the disposition of property for the Cedar Point 2 redevelopment project is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Staff.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So on August 20th, the Housing and Redevelopment Authority approved a contract for private development with NHH Companies, the developer, to construct up to 80 affordable for-sale townhomes in the Cedar Point 2 area. The HRA owns 4 properties within this portion of the project area: 6315, 6333, 6401, and 6409 16th Avenue. Those properties under the contract would be sold to the developer. On September 17th, 2018, the HRA will consider a contract for private development with the developer to construct 218 market-rate apartments along Richfield Parkway. The HRA owns all of the 14 parcels in this portion of the project area that will be sold to the developer under the terms of the contract. Minnesota state statutes require that the Planning Commission consider whether the disposition of property by the HRA is consistent with the Richfield Comprehensive Plan. The proposed multifamily development is consistent with both the guide plan and the goals of the comprehensive plan. The area is guided for high-density housing. The goals for the Cedar Corridor specifically call for a transition in land uses from the airport to single-family residential structures and neighborhoods, which the project provides. And the goals for the area and for housing in the city overall call for a greater diversity of housing options, which the project provides. Do you have any questions?
Any questions for staff? Okay. Do we have a motion on this item?
I have a motion to approve a resolution finding that the disposition of properties by the HRA for the Cedar Point 2 redevelopment project is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion carries. And then we have a similar item, consideration of a resolution finding that the acquisition and disposition of 6501 Penn Avenue by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority is consistent with the Richfield Comprehensive Plan. Staff.
So, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, the property located at 6501 Penn Avenue has been listed for sale for the past year and a half. There are 2 buildings located on this 25,000 square foot property, one of which is occupied by a bumper-to-bumper auto parts store, and the other is primarily vacant, used for storage. The property only recently approached Housing and Redevelopment Authority staff regarding purchasing the property. The HRA has authorized staff to make an offer on the property that will be contingent upon an environmental assessment. If purchased, staff would begin marketing the site for a commercial and/or multifamily residential use, and we actually have been in conversations with some folks about different ideas for the site. An analysis of the potential rehab and reuse of the existing buildings is currently underway. If determined to be unusable, the buildings would be demolished. Again, acquisition and disposition of property by the HRA requires a finding of consistency with the comprehensive plan. Staff believes the purchase of this property is consistent with both the 2008 plan as well as the proposed plan update, which designate the property as mixed use and identify the Penn Avenue corridor for redevelopment.
Any questions for staff?
I have a question. So you did say that there already has been interest in the site contingent upon HRA acquiring the property. Is that correct?
So we've had some conversations with someone who's looking at something that would potentially be commercial and residential, or just commercial. We also had an analysis done before considering making an offer on what the capacity was for housing on the site. So we've done both those things.
Any other questions for staff? How many HRA-owned parcels are there in this area?
We own a single-family house up at 6321 Penn. Do we own anything else? We own a very, half a parcel back behind this property that we're not sure how we ended up with, but that's it.
Okay. And does this immediately abut the Duncan site, or is there?
No, there's a property in between.
Okay. Is the HRA seeking that property, or is that not on the table?
Not at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve a resolution finding that the acquisition and disposition of 6501 Penn Avenue by the Housing and Redevelopment Authority is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Do we have a second? Okay. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. So our next item would be liaison reports. Do we have anything from Community Services Commission? City Council? HRA?
Yes, actually, some of the things that we talked about tonight, the acquisition of 6501 Penn, the Cedar Point housing development properties, as well as it was kind of exciting, purchase property on 73 3rd and Portland for be a Habitat for Humanity rebuild.
Cool. Richfield School Board?
No report.
Transportation Commission, I have no report. And I don't think we have anything for Chamber of Commerce. City Planners report?
We do not have anything additional for you at this time.
I do want to ask, do we know when we'll be seeing or when we'll be taking action on the comp plan? We haven't heard much since probably 6 months ago when we had a joint session with the City Council.
I can maybe answer that one because I have a meeting on my calendar at the end of September to discuss the final presentation before you. So I'm guessing in October.
Okay.
We got comments back from the Met Council a few weeks ago, and we're sort of attempting to interpret those comments and figure out where to go with those. But so October is my best guess based on that meeting that showed up on my calendar for the end of September.
So at this point, what engagement is there remaining? Is there a final presentation and we give a thumbs up, or is there any sort of work session or discussion from this point on?
It may be just council adoption, but
okay,
we could have Melissa confirm that when she's
okay.
back.
Do you know how long we will have to review the final drafts? I just asked because when we get normal packets, we only get a few days to review them, and I would hope for something of this significance, we'd have a bit more time.
Why don't we have Melissa reach out when she's back,
Okay.
because she's, yeah, I don't want to misspeak
Okay.
on her behalf. I just know I have a meeting on my calendar with her and the consultant.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the planners? Okay. Our next meeting is September 24th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned.